Representative Jody Barrett joins us on the program to talk about a subject that came up yesterday regarding homeschooling and vaccinations for our public education system. And Representative Barrett joins us on the Matt Murphy hotline right now. Hey, Jody, how are you?
I'm good, Mr. Murphy. How are you today?
I'm fabulous. Fabulous. Are you ready for a special session, sir?
Well, I guess I'm about as ready as I'm going to get. We've had about 3 months to talk about it, so might as well get down to business.
Well, there's been a lot of talk, and it's my understanding that there will be an announcement either today or tomorrow. At least that's what my little sources are telling me. A little birdie tells me. Are you hearing the same thing, that it's coming pretty soon?
I think that's what we're all anticipating sometime in the next 48 hours. The official call should come down from the governor's office and hopefully give us then some guidelines as to what parts of the code we're going to be able to work in. And I'm sure that's going to open the floodgates to all sorts of ideas and bills being filed over the next couple of weeks as we prepare going into the 21st.
Do you have your hard hat ready? I hear that it might be hard hat season in the General Assembly.
Well, honestly, I think as my freshman class, that we pretty well been trained, I think, to be able to be prepared for these sorts of activities and all the extracurriculars that come with it. So I suspect we'll be ready to go.
Well, I look forward to the conversation moving forward in the next several weeks, because I expect that we'll have a lot to talk about with regard to mental health and public safety and what, if anything, can be done to try to ensure that the public is safe from some of these types of attackers that we saw tragically this past spring in the city of Nashville. I wanted to talk with you about, is it HB 252? Do I have that right?
That is correct. House Bill 252.
All right. Tell me just how this got on your radar screen during session and why you sponsored it and why it passed. I assume that the governor signed it as well. So, I mean, tell me all about it.
So House Bill 252, Senator Joey Hensley and I ran that bill. I ran it in the House. He had it in the Senate. It came to me through an organization called Free Tennessee, and a representative that they had that wanted to address an issue in the law that created two separate rules for homeschool students. And in Tennessee, you have homeschool students that decide to umbrella or register with their local education association, which means they still homeschool. They do all their classes in their residence with their parents, but they turn their grades and their attendance records and whatnot into their local director of schools. That's an independent homeschool student. Then you have others that they want to be free of any ties to the state or state testing requirements or any of that stuff that may come down through the local education association. And they choose to go through an umbrella program, which typically is offered by what the state calls a Class 4 church-related school. Mm-hmm. So again, they're still homeschooled completely at home with their parent as their teacher, but they turn their grades and their attendance records and whatnot in through this umbrella program that houses those records for them, creates transcripts, and when the time comes that they need to send those into a college or something along those lines. So
you have, and I'm just trying to understand this from the perspective of someone that doesn't have any kids in the system, right? So you got public education, you've got homeschool, and then you have a somewhat of a blend of homeschool and private school. Is that what you're describing to me?
Well, it does get somewhat muddied in the waters in that there are homeschoolers that are 100% homeschooled, but their affiliation or their tie that they have is tethered to, their balloon is tethered to a private school rather than through the public school system. But there are also students that attend these private schools in some sort of hybrid manner, and maybe they're only going to classes 2 or 3 days a week at a private school and 2 or 3 days a week at home. So it does get quite muddied, and it makes it difficult, I think, for the state to create guidelines that are clear for everyone. So what House Bill 252 was trying to do was clear up a situation where the law required independent homeschool students to do something that these private school students had an option to get out of, and that was they were required by law to report their immunization records directly to their local director of schools, even though they did not attend school in public schools. They didn't participate in any activities or anything along those lines. And so the bill was designed to try to clean that up so that they had the same rights to privacy and freedoms that other homeschool students had.
So what is the loophole, or what is the confusion on the part of the Tennessee Board of Education? I'm hearing that the Board of Education is still asking for some of the documentation, and some within the system are saying, hey, we don't have to give you that anymore because of 252. What do you know?
Well, this gets a little wonky and gets off into the weeds, but essentially there's a statute in Tennessee Code that's, I believe it's TC 49-6-5001, for those that are listening that want to go look it up, that gives the Department of Health the authority to make all of the rules and guidelines for public school students and Class 4 church-related school students as far as what they're required to produce in order to attend school. Included in that is the Department of Health has the right to make the list of what immunizations are required for school children to attend school. Well, part of what we did with House Bill 252 is we changed some language in two different statutes. One was the statute that expressly required independent homeschool students to report their immunization records to their local director of schools. The other statute was this 5001, in that we changed the definition of what a school is to expressly remove homeschool from that definition. And that's where this confusion is being caused in the rulemaking process. So the statute's been passed, signed by the governor, and is in effect, but now the Department of Education and the Department of Health are going through the rulemaking process to tell Class 4 church-related schools what they are required to produce and obtain from their students in order for them to attend school there. And this change in the definition of what a school is causing some consternation between homeschool parents that don't want to produce that information in the state that still thinks that maybe they have the right to ask for that.
Well, did 252 not clean all that up?
Well, I think it did. And I think maybe that there's just a misunderstanding in the rule and the application of that rule. And so currently I'm in the process of going back through the Government Ops Committee to ask them to review this rule and the definition that they have adopted in order to make sure that the interpretation of what House Bill 252 lines up with what we think it was accomplishing.
You know, I kind of revert back to what was the idea behind requiring immunizations to begin with. And I suppose it is to prevent outbreaks of certain communicable diseases. And that's all well and good. My question is, why then, if I'm a homeschool student and I have association with a private school or a public school for that matter, why I should be expected to turn over my immunization forms if I'm attending a home school, even if I make contact with school systems, because everyone within those school systems are presumably vaccinated. So the only person potentially at risk would then be the student that is unvaccinated that is homeschooled. Does that make sense to you, Jody?
Well, you're making a logical argument that sometimes doesn't always work in state government. So, you know, historically, I think, in recent history, we just dealt with this in the last couple of years, that there is a desire by government in a state of emergency or what is perceived as an emergency to have ways to enforce the rules that they want to put in place on the general public. Well, if you go back to when just about every child was in the public school, back in the 60s, 70s, when all these immunization requirements were put in place, that's the main way that the government that's the tool that they had to use in order to be able to require students and children to be vaccinated. So I think what's happened over the years, and that's certainly just been increased in the last couple of years as we've come out of COVID, is the general public is deciding, you know what, I get to make that decision as to what's best for my child, and I want to do my own research and decide whether or not my child should have this vaccination or not. And instead of having the government and the school system tell them that they're required to do that. And so that's where we're at as a society right now. And that's where I think some of this discussion comes up with trying to determine what the rule should be as it relates to homeschool students.
Yeah, I mean, in the aftermath of COVID-19, it brings up a lot of questions about the way, as you said, we were doing all of this and whether or not it is truly a function of, and let's just go ahead and say it for the state of Tennessee, conservative government, that you dictate to individuals if they want to participate in the public education system what they must put in the bodies of their children. I mean, it's a basic question. I understand science. I understand the nature of communicable diseases. I understand that we've eradicated plenty of communicable diseases through immunizations and whatnot. I think a lot of that is getting a bad rap because of the misrepresentation of what the quote-unquote vaccines were for COVID. But it does kind of get us back to the basic question about where the role of the parents stop and where the role of government begins.
Well, and I think that's a healthy conversation, but it also underscores the necessity for choice for parents when it comes to educational opportunities, because sometimes it's not just the educational part of it that is affected. Sometimes it is even going into your healthcare decisions that you're making, your religious decisions that you've made as a family. And so the more choice that we can provide parents and families in Tennessee when it comes to education, I think that creates more freedom. Because if we're saying we're a free society, but we're free to choose between one thing and one thing only, that's not freedom. We don't have freedom of choice. So in order to be a free society, we have to have options for folks to choose from. And this is one of those things that I think or one of those areas that I think that we can do a lot to improve the expansion of freedom in this state.
So
creating more and more choices when it comes to education.
For the one listener that thinks I'm being intentionally obtuse on this, and 2886, you can go other places if you want to. I'm not trying to be obtuse. I'm trying to understand what the purpose of 252 was. The purpose of 252 is to prevent the state from requiring homeschool students to get immunized, right?
Period, full stop.
Okay, then are you going to need to re-clarify that stated purpose in future legislation to prevent the onerous Board of Education from making these requirements that the bill was designed to stop?
I think there's two different ways to address it. One is through the rulemaking process, which I'm hopeful that we can do it that way. That's the quickest and easiest fix. We can take this back through the Government Ops Committee and have them review the rule that was just presented, have that changed, and that should address the issue. If we can't fix it through that process, then I can come back in the spring with another piece of legislation to fix this and clarify once and for all exactly what the rights are of the state to govern homeschool students.
But the idea here is not just to cover the homeschooler, but also to cover the homeschooler that does participate in some level with private or even public schools?
Well, and we did write an exception in the House Bill 252 that allowed for public school systems and private schools to require certain medical information if that student chose to participate or chooses to participate in extracurricular activities like athletics or otherwise. So TSSAA has regulations and medical information that must be provided. So all of that is still in place. But if a child is 100% schooled at home and not participating in any extracurricular activities or classes in the building with other children, then the school system and the state should not have any right to ask for that private medical information to be produced.
Yeah, but they're doing it anyway, right?
Well, that's
the problem. That's why we're talking, because they're doing it anyway. I get it. No, you're one of the good guys, Jody. I appreciate you explaining it to us and working it out. And I am certain over the next several weeks we'll be talking about events happening on Capitol Hill. And I look forward to those conversations, friend.
Well, it'll be nothing if not exciting.
Amen. And hopefully nothing, and maybe some excitement. It's Representative Jody Barrett. Thank you, Jody.